Tarde, mi gente. All right. You're in store for a treat, I promise you, because I'm going to have a fireside chat with, he's a titan leader in not only the D&I movement, but someone who is truly epitomizes the example of not only executive excellence, but also just empowering our community and leveraging those achievements. He is a graduate of TCU. I know there may be some Horned Frogs in here, I don't know, and they're undefeated. We'll talk about that in a minute. I went to Ohio State. Maybe we'll see what happens for the national championship. But you know, after 30 years at PepsiCo, where reaching the highest levels, leading human resources, he then went on to serve on the board of he's been on the board of TCU for many years, but then became the CEO for the Executive Leadership Council, and now today he's the president and CEO for the National Association of Securities Professionals. So everyone, please give a warm HACR welcome to Ron Parker.
All righty. My man.
All right, thank you.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Muy bien?
Muy bien.
Yeah.
So you should all know that among many Latino corporate leaders, for many, many years, we've always had this nickname for Ron Parker, and we called him Roncito, because he was such a champion and ally for Latino leaders to not only move up the corporate ladder, not only when you were within PepsiCo, but also just being out there. And so many of us adopted that name Roncito because he's become almost like one of us. And so so thank you for that allyship and that leadership and so I want to first start with here's one question that we talk about a lot, and that is we're taught one thing on how to rise up into the mid-level. But then once you get into these higher levels, the rules and the culture change. Can you talk about what were your learning experiences once you started getting to the higher levels within PepsiCo, and what are some of the things that our attendees can learn as they begin to rise up the ladder within their companies?
Well, good. Thank you, and thank you to HACR for inviting me. Sid and I go way back. Sid served on our global, PepsiCo advisory board under the leadership of an iconic Hispanic leader by the name of Raul Izaguirre. We had a Hispanic advisory council, we had a Black advisory council, and this is like 20 years ago. So we were much ahead of the industry with creating an external advisory board that gave us counsel around three key areas: the employer of choice, the product of choice, the partner of choice. Those were our three brands, and they had to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to be given the opportunity to see what we were doing across the enterprise. But it was his leadership, and I'll tell this slight story. It was the state of Arizona basically was not going to recognize Martin Luther King's holiday, and Janet McGee, who at that time was the head of the National Council of La Raza, and she had gone and talked with the Major League Baseball, and we were just minding our own business as an organization. Granted, we had the Tostitos Bowl back in the day, and we sponsored that for a number of years. And I'm not going to call the gentleman's name, but Major League Baseball said, "Why don't you go and harass PepsiCo?" And Janet came to us and said, "I would love for you guys to back me and support me on what we're trying to do with Major League Baseball." At that time, she had secured the alignment of all of the Latino players and players of color of Major League Baseball, and they were going to strike and not play in honor of getting the holiday recognized. And Sid came up and spoke to us about that game and how much money we were spending in the state of Arizona and how we could use our power to get the state to be more accepting of Dr. King's holiday. We also doubled down and invested in minority spending in the state and had the Major League Baseball bow to Janet McGeer and to Sid, who gave this very passionate speech about sports and sports basically being the change agent as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I remember that day if it was yesterday, but it was your voice that we heard, and we said, we got you, and we supported those efforts. But
thank you.
getting back to your, but that's what leaders do. That's what leaders do. Getting back to your question, I mean, you know, at some point in time as you ascend in any organization, you're constantly asking yourself, do I belong? Especially as a person of color. And it was, I think, the panel that we had right before the break, talking about belonging and assimilating and acculturization and all the things that, the stages that you go through in your professional, what I call life cycle. And believe it or not, it comes a time when you have to say to yourself, I do belong. I do belong here. And if they don't understand who I am and what I bring to the party, it's their issue, not mine. And you don't own that. You don't let that be placed upon you, because that becomes an additional burden that you have to deal with, given who we are and what we have to deal with those systems. But at some point in time, when you discover your true self as you ascend and you assert yourself, you really then have to realize that you also have to reinvent yourself. And I must say, I've reinvented myself so many times, I've lost count. But I never not knew who I was. That's what kept me grounded. That was my North Star. And when you're tall, dark, and handsome, hey, you know, leverage it to your advantage, and good things will happen.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, you know, that's great. You know, when we've heard, you know, I was hearing, for example, when Anna Siegel was on stage earlier, and she said something, you know, we always talk about, you know, mentors and sponsors and even the possibility of executive coaches. You know, Anna said something that, well, I've heard this many times. She said it very differently. She said, you know, the higher up you go, the less feedback you get. And I was talking about this, I said, you know, that's kind of true. You're like, where do you go to get feedback when you're a senior vice president, an executive vice president? And what was your way of getting either that feedback, or did you have like your own personal, sometimes called kitchen cabinets, or your own board, or, you know, how did you?
I had my personal board of, my professional board of directors that included both family members and non-family members. People like Raul, people like you know, Earl Graves, people like Johnny Cochran, who gave us what we call the gift of feedback, because feedback is a gift and you have to be willing to accept it. And sought those people out. And I would tell you, and it was stated earlier in the earlier panel, that every CEO that I know of, they have a coach. They won't tell you they have a coach, but they have a coach. For example, Steve Reineman, when he became chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, every quarter he would have a breakfast meeting with 3 other CEOs. One was Kenton Chenault, who ran American Express, good friend. One was Jeff Immelt, who was running chairman and CEO of GE. And then he had also Ken Frazier, who was the chairman and CEO of Merck. And then they would always leave an open chair for someone outside of the business circle to give them nuggets. I do that in my own style. I talk to a futurist every day. Matter of fact, he just texted me before I walked up on the stage. He is at the University of Louisville, Dr. Nat Irvin. I met him 20 years ago when he was at Wake Forest. And he is a professor of business. He is a strategic advisor to one of the most highly acclaimed entertainers, Janelle Monáe. She's as much of a smart businesswoman as she is an entertainer. And he is a futurist. He's able to look around corners and share with me and my colleagues, Maurice Cox and others, insights about where things are going. And as I mentioned, you have to be willing to reinvent yourself throughout your career in order to take full advantage of the opportunities that come before you, and to own it. Own the good, the bad, and the ugly. To both Indra and Steve, who were my CEOs when I was at PepsiCo, I would say to them when I had my one-on-one, can I give you a gift? There were days when they wanted to hear it, and because they were the CEO and chairman, there were days they didn't want to hear it. But I think we do our leaders a disservice when we don't give them the gift of feedback, and we don't have that relationship that we have with people like you and Janet and Raul and others that were part of my board of directors. Now, I will tell you, I had to fire a couple of my board of directors because they weren't giving me what I call the value that I was seeking. And they were basically just there. And don't be afraid to replace your board of directors from a personal and professional standpoint and add to it. So I have a group that covers all of the age cohorts that exist. And you know, there are days when I go and get direct feedback from a member of my family, and there are days when I go to a professional like Dr. Urban and get the gift of insights of things yet to come.
That's interesting because it almost seems like that I think for many there in the audience is that maybe that personal board that you have now may not be that same personal board as you're rising further up the corporate ladder. Because you're evolving, you know, maybe you're a director, now you're a VP and you're senior VP, and the advice you're getting is very different.
Sure.
So was that kind of been that experience of having to say I got to evolve your board, especially?
Right. I mean, and you have to be willing to deal with what that means as your career evolves. Because I will tell you, my high school friends, we just had our 50th high school reunion, where I was class president. I hadn't seen some of those individuals for almost 49 years because I had evolved to another circle within a circle within a circle, and just didn't see, you know, them fitting into my model of leadership because I moved on. They have their own. But I will tell you, one of the individuals who was a part of my circle, he's no longer with us, was Vernon Jordan. Vernon was a very dear friend, and I'll share this story with you. I was running all of North America for PepsiCo, and I felt that was the metric or the tool by which I was assessing my prominence in the organization. So I had all of HR, all of labor relations, created a center of labor relations, doing some work on the board of identifying candidates for our PepsiCo board. And Steve came to me and said, would you become the Chief Global Diversity Officer for PepsiCo? And I said, no. I told him no 3 times. I said, as a tall, good-looking black man, that's not what I want to do. I mean, I do that anyway. I do diversity, and some of you do. That's a part of who you are. That's how you are wired because of who we are. And I said, I don't want that to be a part of my professional portfolio. So I thought it was Maurice Cox calling me, playing a joke on me, but my assistant, Becky Moore, whom you know, and she loves you, said, Vernon is on the phone. And I picked the phone and said, Maurice, I don't have time to talk to you today. He said, no, this is Vernon Jordan. I said, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan. He said, I'm going to say this once. He says, not what you control, but what you influence. Now think about it. It's not what you control, but what you influence. So he hung up the phone, just click. Hello? Hello? So I stepped back and I said, let me reflect upon that. It's not what you control, but what you influence. Then I started thinking about his career. Vernon never sat into an appointed cabinet position of any administration, but he was an advisor to some of the most powerful people in the world. So my CEO is asking me to set at his side and give him advice and counsel on a major change effort that we embarked upon with your help and others, of really transforming the organization into one of the most iconic organizations that exist out there. Harvard Business School did a business case on us and our advisory council and our work in D&I. So that was the legacy, but it's not what you control. So I called up Steve and said, is that job still open? Because I would like to take it. And he then said something that I will never forget as well. He said, how many employees do we have around the world? I said, we have 250,000 employees around the world. He said, as far as I'm concerned, those 250,000 employees report to you. Now that's empowerment. So I made a personal contract with myself, and I am not going to let him down. I can't afford to let him down, because if he's going to empower me by giving me the access to everything that goes on in the organization, I'm going to make sure that I am ready. It's like being in sports. When you are called to play the position, be a starting player, to do what the team is looking to do, and that's to win games and win championships, you feel compelled to do and be the best that you can. So I took that whole mental mindset of sports to that job. And there are people in this audience here that I can point to, Doc over there, that was one of those individuals we discovered and said, she has the potential to do great things. And I'm a guy, Sid, I look at potential. I use the historical track record as a data point, but I look at other aspects of leadership that speaks to your potential. And my job as an HR professional at that time was to give you opportunities to display your full potential and to get you the resources for you to do your thing. Then I would just sit back and let them do their thing. So.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's an example of just not only what you did at PepsiCo, but the fact that the legacy of what you did is still there, and of course he's referring to Dora Marori-Simeon, who's sitting over there, and so by the way, she got her PhD just during the pandemic. Give Dr.
Stand up, Doc, stand up.
Yeah, Marori at PepsiCo. Dora.
I claim that.
Absolutely.
I claim it. Angel Rodriguez claims it. Others claim it. But we claim that investment that is yielding that return. So, and it can get us into the work that I'm doing now.
Absolutely. This is great. So I want to talk about your years when you were the president and CEO for the Executive Leadership Council. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Executive Leadership Council, this is the preeminent global organization for Black executives. And and I even before you became CEO, I studied it. And I says, how can we understand and learn? And then you became the CEO, and you were CEO for many years. I think almost 6 years. Can you talk to us about what were some of the learnings that you hear from whether it's Black executives or other executives about the challenges of being an executive? In fact, yesterday we did a session about when you're the only one in the room, with, all these other sometimes challenges that we face. But what were some of the learnings that you saw from just feedback from other executives, and how did that shape your leadership? Because I know one of the things that you did, which I give you all the credit, is that I know that the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion was your idea, for the record. And so I want to make sure that everyone knows for the record. I mean, but this happened while you were CEO for ELC. So talk to us about some of those learnings, and how can we learn from your learnings from those years when you were ELC president CEO?
Very good question. Very insightful question. When you're dealing with a group of individuals who've ascended to that level, they were all C-suite. They were all either CEOs or C-suite, chief marketing officer, chief information officer, chief human resources officer. They were chief procurement officers. These were all officers of their respective organizations. And the only way you can become a member of ELC is by invitation. You can be no more than 3 reporting levels removed from the enterprise-wide CEO. So it's very selective. We broadened it when I was there because I saw the trend by working with Futurists of people of color, Black professionals becoming entrepreneurs. They weren't going to do a 30-year track with the PepsiCo. They were going to go out and do their own thing. So we broadened it to to get people like Chris Williams, who Williams and Shank has his own capital markets company, Jim Reynolds from Loop Capital, others. So we broadened it. We even brought in thought leaders. But during that time when I was there, I was introduced to another gentleman who's no longer with us, is Dr. Price Cobbs. Dr. Price Cobbs wrote the book, The Jesus Bag. He was University of San Francisco, did a lot of work out at Berkeley. But during that time frame, we basically discovered the aspects of power. And when you're in the C-suite, some people know how to recognize power and use power. Others are just so glad to be there that you almost want to say, get out. Which I've told a few, hey, you're not leveraging your power. But we discovered said power. Now we had to become attuned to how did we use that power, manage that power, not for our personal gains, but for the mission, the movement. And by understanding that power, we got the attention of other organizations to respond. To your point about the CEO action, that came out of a CEO summit that the EOC did with CEOs only, people like yourself who were at HACR, other CEOs. We had the Chatham House rules that nothing was, but we basically challenged them. And we showed them data that blacks and Latinos were one of the most fastest, most impactful consuming group around any goods or services, that we basically set the tone. I even talked to the person who was the CEO at Twitter. I said, do you know about Black Twitter? He said, no. I said, that's how we do it. We roll with creating our own platforms within platforms. But he knew nothing about Black Twitter, which was its own network and conversation thread. So during that time, we basically discovered power. And our power basically created an atmosphere where we didn't ask permission. We basically said, this is what needs to be done. And if we don't, we have ways of influencing it. So it became almost like a constructive revolution with Dr. Cobb's leadership of letting us really understanding our individual power, but more importantly, our collective power is what he exposed us to, and we leveraged it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's been an inspiration for me and HACR, because now, having, seen you in action and what you did at ELC, it really prompted us to say, we have to make sure that we're interacting with our Latino C-suite executives. But you hit on a key point. At some point, we're all going to reach that point where now you have that power. So when you get there, don't just be happy that you're there. Make a difference. And so I love that, Ron. Let me also, and now you've reinvented yourself again. Now you're the president and CEO for the National Association of Securities Professionals. While we were having lunch, I was sharing with him that I've actually been interacting with NASP since my early Wall Street years, where I was like, "Where mi gente?" And NASP was one of the organizations that I interacted with early in my Wall Street career. But now you're the president and CEO here, and once again, you kind of reinvented yourself. Talk to us, about what you're doing at NASP, and why is it so important, and how should we think about, as we're being asked to, because you kind of shared being prepared to reinvent yourself, and you might be tapped on the shoulder to say, hey, you're in this department, now you're going to move to this department, and in your case, now you took on the CEO of a very well-established organization.
37 years old, founded by Maynard Jackson. Maynard was the mayor of Atlanta. For those of you who know history, he basically transformed Atlanta and really brought the full power of inclusion to that airport when they built it, getting contracts to minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, and it became a model. But again, at that point where I was reassessing after retiring from ELC, where we established the Next Gen CEO gathering in partnership with Deloitte, where we asked companies to tell me who are your leaders who were on the track to become president and CEOs. So we had this tagline, coming from Pepsi, I'm a frustrated marketing guy, even though I'm in HR. We said, so you want to be a CEO, be careful what you ask for. And what we did, we created, and the CEOs, all the black CEOs became the deans of the program in partnership with Deloitte. They taught the course. And what they did was, they focused on the day they got the call from the board of directors saying that they were CEOs. They prepared this group of cohorts, 25, we would run through a class, what you need to be ready for when you get that call to step in to be CEO, because your life will change. We had a session with Don Thompson, CEO of McDonald's at the time. He did a session with his family because he had to tell his wife, now that I'm the CEO, there are certain things you can share at the beauty salon. There are certain things that I will share with you that you can't. He told his kids, there are certain behaviors that I would expect you because they are assessing me through you. He had that conversation. We met with Judy Smith, wherein she gave us a whole session, or gave them a whole session, on your brand has been compromised. And we used the Penn State model, where Ken Frazier was the president of the board at Kent State when the Joe Paterno thing hit. Not only was he sucked into it as the chair of the board, his company and his brand got sucked into all of that. She basically taught us a crisis management of how you unwind all of that so that you regain your presence and you don't lose value of your own personal brand. So we taught them in 4 days, so you want to be a CEO, be careful what you ask for, and we gave them that. Fast forward, after leaving the ELC, I started to read information around what is this issue that relates to the racial wealth gap that we all are attuned to. And with the murder of George Floyd, it just crystallized, and in timing, where John Rogers and Melanie Hobson called up and they said, listen, we know you retired. Can you come and do for NASP what you did for the ELC? And I have this mantra, if I do something, I'm gonna run it like I own it. That way I feel connected to it. So the whole idea is around closing the racial wealth gap. And we look at data and how money is made and how wealth is transferred from one generation to the next generation. We have to start thinking about how do we own assets, real estate, tangible assets, liquid assets that you can transfer and put in a plan through CFA advisors, because the greatest transfer of wealth is happening now. My generation is beginning to transfer to millennials and Gen Zers the portfolio that we have built up by being a part of major corporations like PepsiCo, Bank of America, and Toyota and other organizations, to transfer that wealth. But otherwise, we will never get out of what I call the poverty doom loop. So you do that by basically planning. And you do that by working with people who look like you, look like me, and trusting that they will manage your portfolio in a way that 1 + 1 = 5. Now that's Ron's math. I do it, doesn't quite fit, but you get the meaning of 1 + 1 = 5, right? You take that understanding along with power and consumption of Black and Latino and women, you're talking about trillions of dollars of GDP growth that changes government policies and practices to the point where we are now, and it should come out today, I don't think I'm preempting him, but Congressman Cleaver, because he knows I'm a big sports fan, he came to us and he said, all of these large institutions who have these endowments, billions of dollars, and you look at the field of play, and you see who the athletes are on the field, who is generating income for those universities to put into an endowment. Then you look at the money managers of who's managing that money and being paid legal fees and money management fees. They don't look like us in the room. 98% of the $80 trillion that are being managed by asset management firms, 98% is being done by white males. 98%. See, I flipped the narrative on its head. They would keep telling me, I said, so what's the data? What's the data that's telling me? They said, well, 1.4% is managed by minority firms. 1.4. So can we move it to 1.5 or 1.6? How about 2%? That changes jobs, because if you manage that money, there's a good possibility you're going to hire people who look like you. Those people are going to spend money in the communities where we live and serve. So it has a cascading effect on closing the wealth gap. So what I'm doing now with Robinhood, we're going to democratize wealth. We're going to democratize wealth. We're going to basically say to a generation, you have a right to sit at the table. You have the right to own assets. You have the right to choose what you want to do with your careers. And oh, by the way, you will not be making 10 times less than your non-diverse counterparts. If you're a female, you will not be making half of the amount that white families make. If you are a family of color, no. We're going to change that narrative. And we can start with the World Economic Forum when you're out there in Davos.
Oh, absolutely. That's a big
That's
mission,
a big one.
So that's big.
It's a big one.
That's
And if I may, Sid,
yeah.
William D. Du Bois, I like to read, and W. Du Bois basically said, if you're in poverty and you are in an environment where there is nothing, and you're the lowest group on the totem pole, you can kind of live with that. When nothing around you is there to even aspire to. But to live in a country where the abundance is around us each and every day, and to be on the low end of that, that's frustration. That's anger. We've even said to the United States government that if you don't deal with this wealth gap issue, this is a national security issue. A national security issue. That's big.
Yeah, no, this is big and pivotal, and that's why under your leadership with NASP, and I know you work with many the companies, many of whom are here as well,
yes.
which is great. You know, here's my last question. I know they're looking at me saying time for questions, but I want to ask you, two more quick questions. One is that, what's some wisdom that you want to share with our attendees, just based on just not only your knowledge, but knowing many here who are getting ready to break through into senior roles within their companies. What kind of advice would you some of that Ron Parker wisdom that you always love to share? I know you have a lot.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, it's a very good question. And before I forget, because I'm old,
You look great.
I want to applaud Bank of America. Where are you, Bank of America? You guys over here? Our good friend Lionel Knoll is the chairman of your board. I know John Newton-Dahl very well. I know your president and CEO. He signed on to the CEO action back 5 years ago. We did this with Tim Ryan at PwC.
You got Monica Lozano on the board too.
Yeah.
Which is,
Here's
great.
the deal. You guys, during the COVID-19 post-George Floyd, you took an equity position, I think, in 5 minority banks. 5 minority banks. And I say this, Sid, because there are banks that are out there that are minority banks, that are community banks, that service our communities. Small businesses, mid-cap businesses, mid-sized businesses. During the COVID-19 crisis, the SBA, which I applaud them for doing it, made the application for COVID-19 relief, financial relief, so cumbersome that it took a room of lawyers to fill out the paperwork. I was told by one of the major black banks, Industrial Bank in Washington, D.C., they said if the government had given the money in a handbasket to stand on the street, they had no way of processing the information to track it so that you could be given forgiveness once the time expired. My point is, it takes leadership and courage like Bank of America that put money, equity money, into these 5 banks and say, listen, build your infrastructure, hire more people, because guess what? It's not if another pandemic happens, it is when. And we want those institutions to be propped up so they can respond to the communities that they serve. So the bit of wisdom that I would impart upon this group is you have to be consistent. You have to be consistent. You have to be consistent in your performance to the point where you start, that consistency leads to trust. And from trust, you are given opportunities to do more. So during my career at PepsiCo, and even with the EOC, and hopefully with NASP, I am consistent in my messaging. Because inconsistency creates confusion. Confusion creates suspect, and then all of a sudden, you got all of these questions. You don't put a player in a game if you think or you're not sure that they're going to contribute to the accomplishment or to the goal you're trying to accomplish. I can harken back to my days as a tight end, which I think is the most important position on the field, by the way. He's like an army Swiss knife. You can use him in different areas. But every time I tried to get graded when I was with the Bears, I wanted to grade out at the 90th percentile. Because that meant I was consistent. Which meant that they would put they would think about running plays with me that would take advantage of that consistency, because that consistency could be depended upon. Most leaders, even if you're in the unfortunate situation of war, you want to have people around that you know you can depend on, who's going to drive the return on investment, who's going to add value, and it's going to be consistent. I'd never go into a fight not knowing whether or not my co-pilot Maurice Cox doesn't have my back. That's how we ride. Ride or die.
Oh, yeah. I love that. No, you and Maurice Cox, we two were like models as partners. So I know and I'm getting a message from the team. I want to give a chance for maybe 2 questions from the audience. We'll try to get as many here, but just some quick questions from the audience, and this is your chance to get some wisdom. So feel free to ask Ronnie. He hides from nothing. So questions from the audience. Yes, right over here.
Hi, Jorge Neri, Bank of America. Thank you for your words.
Good.
My question is, you mentioned that when you make an assessment on a person that you're looking to sponsor, you look at their track record as a data point, but you alluded to what's their potential. What are some of the things that you find that tell you this person has a potential?
Good question.
Thank you.
In the world of HR, for those of you who are HR people, years ago, you were being assessed on your technical depth and skills and capabilities. In today's world, it's around curiosity. So if you're curious about things and you want to know what's going on, I look at that as a potential indicator because you're willing to learn. We're also hearing in the world of work that the ability to unlearn is just as important as your ability to learn. Because if we're going to reinvent and use the talent that we have in our existing organization, and as technology comes in and is changing the world of work, I want to know, do you have the ability to unlearn it, and then I can reprogram you, almost as if you were a computer. So it's kind of like boot and reboot. Now, I pull the plug out of the, it doesn't get any electricity, and plug it back in. It works wonderful to me. But in the world of work, and the work is going to impact about 73% of all jobs today, technology, it means that you have to quickly unlearn and adapt new things. The second attribute that I look for is agility. How agile are you? Because you're going to be confronted with change and conflict and nuances that I want to see if you can withstand. Because if you're rigid and you have, this is the way I've been doing it, I've been successful at it, you're going to go down. Because too much around us is changing in the world of work. So curiosity and agility are the 2 things that I look for that shows me that you have the potential. Then it becomes on me to put you in positions where you can demonstrate your potential and that consistency that I talked about.
Great, thanks. I know we're over time. I got questions for one quick one, super quick one. My staff's going to kill me, so my apologies, staff. One last one. Right over here. Last question over here.
Hello, Maria Lopez from PepsiCo. Which one is one example or a couple of examples of the things that you needed to unlearn and that help you the most advancing based on your culture?
Good question. Very good
how
question.
you were raised up.
She asked basically what were some of the things that I had to unlearn. And that is, I didn't have to be perfect. As people of color, we have a tendency to put additional pressures on ourselves by wanting to be perfect because we think the system is going to reject us if we aren't. Guess what? They are not perfect. The system is not perfect. The culture is not perfect. So don't put that pressure on you that you have to be perfect, meaning that you spend the extra hours at work from your family and you're exhausted when you go home and you can't think when you're exhausted. You can't be your best. So stop striving to be perfect because it doesn't exist. So I had to unlearn that I could not be perfect. I could be good and didn't have to be perfect. That's a difference. And I started to breathe. I started to see things in a much clearer because I wasn't so narrowly focused on getting that particular project or initiative or work problem perfect. But I don't want to be raggedy either. You know what I mean by raggedy? Your stuff is not good. It's not tight, you know. You go in there and it's all, oh, no. So, but you don't have to be perfect, okay? So give yourself some room to learn and discover what you might have overlooked that adds to good work that you're putting forth. So that's what I had to do because I was putting pressure on myself and I was becoming disconnected with my family to the point where my wife told me, she said, we don't know you anymore. You're striving to be that which they want you to, but you're not being what we want you to be. And I'm not sure if you want to be what they want you to be. So in my story, I left PepsiCo for a year. I walked out. I said, I'm done. And it was Roger Enrico who said, we need you to come back. At that time, no one ever returned to PepsiCo. So I have a legacy of being one of the first to ever return to PepsiCo. But I walked away. I said, you know what? I don't like who I've become. I've compromised my own standards. I missed too many birthdays and holidays with my family, negotiating contracts. I am so committed, I am overcommitted. And I'm not going to let that happen. So I walked away. And they asked me to return. But I said, if I come back, I'm coming back under my terms and my conditions. And I made sure I knew who I was as I re-entered that environment at PepsiCo. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, that's so important, and I mean it's just, you know, one of the things I really admire about you, Ron, is that one is that you're always so authentic in what you do and say. You're not afraid to, you know, to speak truth to power, and you know so many things that I think is be part of just the overall legacy. And you know, I mean, I love Ron Parker. I mean, I admire what he has done, and you know, and he's so available. When I was like, Ron, I need some ideas and counsel. I probably crashed Davos because of Ron's idea. Say, just go crash Davos and see what happens there. And apparently it worked because I'm speaking this January in Davos.
Congratulations!
Again. So, I mean,
sure, it's great.
So it's good.
That's using your power.
So, you know,
Yeah.
So absolutely. So again, thanks for that applause. But I want everyone to please give a big, huge applause to
Thank you.
Ron
Thank you.
Parker,
Thank you.
President and CEO of the National Association of Securities Professionals. Absolutely,
Thank
give
you.
this man an applause. What this man has done is his sole legacy. So thank you very, very much.
Good. Thank you. My man.
Thank you.